What does Christmas really mean when the lights go out and silence falls? On the most awaited night of the year, a child was facing hunger while the world celebrated. But the Christmas spirit, so forgotten by many, found a heart willing to act. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. Christmas Eve in New York City brought with it that contradictory air that only great cities know. The streets of Chinatown glowed with colorful ornaments hanging from the lampposts, lights blinking in the shop windows, and the sound of Christmas carols echoed from the speakers of department stores. The commercial district was bustling with people carrying bags full of gifts, their faces illuminated by the anticipation of the coming feast. There was a smell of panettone in the air, mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee escaping from the bakeries and cafes scattered along the busy sidewalks. But not all was light and joy on that night before Christmas. On the corner of Mott Street and Canal Street, right in front of a small bakery called Our Daily Bread, a painful contrast revealed itself to the eyes of anyone who truly wanted to see. There, a frail little girl, no more than 4 years old, struggled to lift a sack of flour that weighed almost as much as she did. Her small hands were dirty with white powder, her fingers reddened by the effort, and her thin body trembled not only from the cold of the New York night, but also from the exhaustion of a job no child should ever know. The girl's name was Lucy. Her brown hair was disheveled, tied in a poorly made ponytail, and her clothes were patched, too big for her fragile body. She gasped with each attempt to lift the sack, her brown eyes wide with effort, but she never gave up. With each failure, she took a deep breath and tried again, because she knew her reward depended on it. It wasn't money she was after. It was the hard loaves of bread from the day before, the ones the bakery owner could no longer sell and would be thrown away. For Lucy, those loaves meant the difference between her sister eating or spending another night hungry. Inside the bakery, Sonia, the owner, watched the scene through the glass window with an impatient expression. She was a woman in her 50s, with dyed blonde hair, always dressed in clean aprons and a posture that made it clear she ran the establishment with a firm hand. Sonia wasn't inherently evil, but life had taught her to be tough. A widow for 10 years, she had raised 2 children alone while keeping the business afloat, and that had left her with little patience for the weaknesses of others. She opened the bakery door and shouted, her voice cutting through the cold night air. "Work faster if you want the bread, girl. I don't have all night." Lucy lowered her head, startled by the harsh tone, and redoubled her efforts. Her little arms trembled violently as she tried to drag the sack across the ground, since lifting it was beyond her strength. People passed by on the sidewalk, some casting pitying glances, others quickly looking away as if ignoring the scene could erase the injustice of that moment. A young couple commented quietly on the situation, but moved on. An elderly woman sighed and shook her head, but didn't stop. Everyone was in a hurry, everyone had their own problems, and interfering in others' affairs was something life in the big city taught people to avoid. It was at that moment that Anthony Woodward turned the corner. Anthony was an imposing man. At 52, he had an erect posture, graying hair combed back with care, and wore an impeccable grey suit under a black wool overcoat. His shoes shone even under the dim light of the street lamps, and on his left wrist he wore a Swiss watch that cost more than many people would earn in years of work. Everything about him communicated success, power, and control. Anthony Woodward was known in New York's business circles as one of the richest men in the city, the owner of a construction empire that had erected buildings all over the state. But behind that facade of success there was a story few knew. Anthony was a profoundly lonely man. His mansion on the Upper East Side, with its 5 bedrooms, heated pool, and a garden designed by a renowned landscape artist, was always empty. He had never married, never had children, and his family had dispersed over the years. His only brother lived in the South and they barely spoke. His holiday seasons were always spent alone, in the company of books and a bottle of wine, watching the illuminated city from his office window. That night, Anthony was coming from a meeting at a nearby hotel. It was one of those charity functions his position required him to attend, where wealthy businessmen gathered for expensive dinners and to discuss donations that served more to alleviate taxes than to truly help anyone. He had left early, tired of the empty conversations and false smiles, and decided to walk a bit before calling his driver. He just wanted a quick coffee to feel the city's movement, to remember that there was life beyond boardrooms and million-dollar contracts. That's when he saw Lucy. Anthony stopped in the middle of the sidewalk as if he had been punched in the stomach. His breath caught in his throat. There, right, in front of the bakery illuminated by Christmas lights, was a child who could barely stand, desperately trying to drag a sack of flour that was bigger than her. His hands began to tremble. Something about that image hit him with a force he hadn't expected, that he wasn't prepared to feel. Suddenly it was no longer Mott Street he was seeing. It was a dirt road in the Bronx more than 40 years ago. He was the 7-year-old boy in torn clothes, with bare feet, his stomach rumbling with hunger, standing at the door of a bakery begging for anything they could give him. He remembered the way people looked at him, with that mixture of pity and contempt, as if he were less than human for being poor. He remembered the humiliation of having to beg, of having to submit to heavy labor just to earn leftover food. Sonia's voice shouting at Lucy brought him back to the present. That laziness won't get you anywhere here, you hear? If you want the bread, you have to earn it. Anthony felt something burn inside his chest. It wasn't just anger. It was a deep, visceral indignation that came from a place he had locked away for decades. Without thinking, his feet began to move. He crossed the street with determined steps, his overcoat fluttering behind him, and in a few seconds he was in front of the bakery. Lucy looked up, frightened by the imposing figure that had appeared beside her. She took a step back, fearful, clutching the sack of flour as if it were her only possession in the world. Her eyes met Anthony's, and for a moment there was only silence. Sonia, watching from inside the bakery, frowned. She knew men like him, expensive suits, arrogant posture, types who thought they could show up and give moral lectures without knowing people's reality. She crossed her arms and stepped out of the bakery, planting herself on the doorstep with a defiant expression. "Can I help you with something, sir?" Her voice had a sharp edge, but Anthony was not intimidated. He pointed to Lucy, his eyes still fixed on the child. "Why is a girl this age carrying a weight like that?" Sonia shrugged, as if the question were too obvious to deserve an answer. "She wants bread, she works. Simple as that. I'm not running a charity here, mister." Anthony clenched his fists inside his overcoat pockets. His voice, when it came, was low but charged with an authority that made Sonia take an involuntary step back. "This isn't work. This is child exploitation. She can barely stand, and you're demanding she carry sacks that an adult would struggle to lift." Sonia rolled her eyes, annoyed. "Look, sir, I don't know who you think you are, but this girl shows up here every day begging for food. I could just send her away, but I give her a chance to work and earn what she needs. If you think that's so bad, then maybe you should take her home and feed her yourself." The taunt was thrown out like a challenge, but Sonia didn't expect what happened next. Anthony looked at Lucy again. The girl was trembling, not just from cold, but from fear. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew that arguments between adults rarely ended well for her. Her life experiences had taught her to be invisible, not to draw attention, to accept whatever she was given and leave. But Anthony couldn't just walk away. He knelt, getting down to Lucy's, eye level, and spoke with a softness that surprised even himself. "What's your name?" His voice was gentle, something Lucy wasn't used to hearing. She hesitated, glancing quickly at Sonia, as if asking for permission to speak. When the bakery owner just snorted and turned away, Lucy answered in a barely audible whisper. "Lucy." Anthony nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Lucy, why are you here? Why are you doing this work?" The girl bit her lower lip, her eyes beginning to shine with unshed tears. She didn't want to cry. Crying meant weakness, and weakness meant not getting the bread. But the kindness in this strange man's voice was breaking down the defenses she had built. "My sister. She's sick. She needs to eat." The words came out in broken pieces, as if each syllable cost an immense effort. Anthony closed his eyes for a moment, feeling an old pain awaken in his chest. He knew that story. He had lived that story. "Where is your sister now?" Lucy pointed vaguely in the direction of a dark alley that led to the back of the neighborhood, where the buildings gave way to precarious structures and makeshift shacks. "There. We live there." Anthony stood up, his decision made. He looked at Sonia with an expression that left no room for argument. "How much were you going to give her?" Sonia blinked, confused by the question. "What do you mean? How much bread were you going to give her in exchange for this work?" The bakery owner hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. 2 or 3 old loaves, from yesterday." Anthony took his wallet from the inner pocket of his overcoat. He opened it and pulled out several bills, extending them to Sonia. "I want 10 fresh loaves, and I also want milk. Butter, cold cuts, and everything a family needs for a decent meal. Prepare it now." Sonia looked at the money, her eyes widening. It was far more than she would make in an entire week of work. She took the bills quickly, as if Anthony might change his mind, and hurried into the bakery to prepare the order. Anthony turned his attention back to Lucy, who was watching him with a mixture of confusion and timid hope. "You're going to take me to your sister. You don't have to carry anything else. I'll carry everything." Lucy blinked, still processing what was happening. No one had ever been so kind to her. No one had ever cared. She nodded slowly, still wary, but something in the man's eyes made her feel that, just maybe, she could trust him. While they waited for Sonia to prepare the food, Anthony watched Lucy. The girl was shivering with cold, wearing only a thin t-shirt and pants torn at the knees. Without a second thought, he took off his overcoat and placed it over her shoulders. The coat was enormous, dragging on the ground, but it was warm and smelled nice, and Lucy wrapped herself in it with a sigh of relief. Sonia returned with 2 full bags. There were fresh loaves, still warm, cartons of milk, cheese, ham, margarine, and even some cookies and a small cake she had set aside. She handed the bags to Anthony without a word, but there was something different in her eyes now. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was just the discomfort of having her cruelty so openly exposed. Anthony took the bags and looked at Lucy. "Take me to your sister." They walked down Mott Street, past the illuminated shops and hurried people. Lucy led the way, still wrapped in Anthony's overcoat, and he followed close behind, carrying the heavy bags without any effort. People looked at them with curiosity, this impeccably dressed man following a street child, but no one said anything. They turned onto a smaller street, then another, until the glow of the Christmas lights began to fade. The sidewalks grew narrower, the buildings gave way to simple houses, and then to even more precarious structures. The smell changed too. It was no longer panettone and coffee. It was poorly maintained sewers, accumulated trash, dampness. Anthony knew that smell. He had grown up surrounded by it. Finally, Lucy stopped in front of a structure that barely deserved to be called a house. It was a shack made of wood and tarpaulin, squeezed between other similar shacks, in an alley so narrow that 2 people could hardly pass side by side. There was no door, just an old curtain hanging in the entrance. Lucy pushed the curtain aside and went in. Anthony hesitated for a moment, then followed her. The inside was even worse than he had imagined. The space was tiny, perhaps 100 square feet in total. There was no furniture, just a thin mattress on the floor covered with dirty sheets. And on that mattress, lying on her side, was a girl who looked to be about 7 or 8 years old. Her name was Anna. Her brown hair was stuck to her sweaty forehead, her face was pale, and her lips had a bluish tint that made Anthony's heart clench. The girl was breathing with difficulty, her chest rising and falling irregularly. Even from a distance, he could see she was very sick. Lucy ran to her sister and knelt beside her, touching her face gently. "Anna, I brought food, and a man who's going to help us." Anna opened her eyes slowly. They were the same brown color as Lucy's, but they were dull, lifeless. She looked at Anthony with an empty expression, as if she didn't even have the energy to be surprised. Anthony put the bags on the floor and approached. He knelt beside the mattress, his expensive suit touching the dirty ground, and reached out to touch Anna's forehead. She was burning up. The fever was high, dangerously high. "How long has she been like this?" Lucy lowered her head, her voice small. 3 days, she can't eat. Almost anything. Just drinks a little water." Anthony felt a wave of urgency wash over him. This girl needed medical help immediately, but first he needed to understand their situation. "Where are your parents? Where are they?" Lucy began to cry silently, tears streaming down her dirty face. "Mummy, she left a long time ago. She said she was going to look for work and never came back. And Daddy, we never knew him." Anthony felt the ground disappear from under his knees. Two little girls completely alone in the world, with no one to protect them, no one to care for them. And one of them was on the verge of something very serious. He looked at Anna, then at Lucy, and made the most important decision of his life in that moment. "You're coming with me. Now. Anna needs a doctor, and I'm taking her to a hospital." Lucy's eyes widened, scared. "We don't have money for a hospital, mister." Anthony shook his head, his voice firm but gentle. "I do, and you don't need to worry about that. You just need to trust me." He took his phone from his pocket and dialed quickly when someone answered. On the other end, his voice took on the commanding tone that everyone who worked for him knew well. "Paul, I need you to pick me up immediately. I'm sending the location now, and come in the bigger car. We're going straight to Mount Sinai Hospital. Have the emergency team ready to receive us." He hung up and looked at the girls. Anna was so weak she could barely keep her eyes open, but Lucy was watching him with an expression that mixed fear and a hope too fragile to be named. Anthony carefully lifted Anna into his arms, surprised by how light she was. The girl was practically skin and bones. She moaned softly at the movement but had no strength to resist. Lucy held onto the leg of Anthony's pants, still wearing his overcoat, refusing to let him out of her sight. They left the shack and walked back to the main street, where normal life continued as if nothing had happened. The Christmas lights still twinkled merrily, people still rushed by with their gift bags, Christmas carols still echoed through the streets. But something had changed for Anthony, something deep and irreversible. In less than 10 minutes, a black luxury car pulled up at the corner. Paul, Anthony's driver for over 15 years, got out quickly and opened the back door. His eyes widened when he saw his boss carrying a sick girl with another dirty child clinging to him, but he asked no questions. He knew Anthony well enough to know that when he made a decision, there was no turning back. "Straight to Mount Sinai. Fast, but be careful." "Yes, sir." The car set off, cutting through the heavy New York traffic with the expertise of someone who knew every shortcut in the city. Inside the vehicle, Anthony held Anna on his lap, feeling her fever burn through his expensive shirt. Lucy sat beside him, her eyes fixed on her sister, her small hands holding Anna's hand tightly. "It's going to be okay," Anthony whispered, more to himself than to the girls. "It's going to be okay." But as the car sped through the New York night, past the illuminated neighborhoods toward the hospital, Anthony wasn't sure of anything. He wasn't sure if Anna would survive. He wasn't sure what he was doing or why he was doing it. All he knew was that, for the first time in decades, he felt something other than the constant emptiness that had been his companion for so long. He felt purpose. He felt that, perhaps, life was giving him a second chance to do something that truly mattered. And as the city lights flashed by the car window, Anthony Woodward, the man who had everything but had never had anything, began to understand that this Christmas Eve would change his life forever. Mount Sinai Hospital stood imposingly in an affluent part of New York City, its glass towers reflecting the city lights like a beacon of hope for those who could afford its services. It was one of the most expensive and well-equipped hospitals in the country, a place where business leaders, celebrities, and politicians received first-class treatment. For ordinary people, especially for children like Anna and Lucy, that place seemed to belong to another world, a reality too distant to even dream of. But on that Christmas Eve night, that world opened up for them. Anthony's car stopped at the emergency entrance with a gentle squeal of the brakes. Before Paul could even turn off the engine, 2 nurses and a doctor were already running toward the vehicle. Anthony had called on the way, using his influence to ensure the team was prepared. He got out of the car with Anna in his arms, the girl weighing less than a feather against his chest, and the medical team immediately surrounded him. The doctor, a woman in her 40s with her hair in a bun and attentive eyes, quickly touched Anna's forehead and checked her breathing. Her face hardened into an expression of professional concern. How long has she had the fever? Her voice was firm, focused. 3 days, according to her sister. Anthony indicated Lucy, who had gotten out of the car and was clinging to his leg, terrified by all the commotion. The doctor signaled to the nurses, who immediately brought a gurney. Anthony carefully placed Anna on it, and in seconds, the girl was being wheeled into the hospital. Lucy tried to run after her, but one of the nurses gently held her back. "She's my sister! Let me go with her!" Lucy's voice came out in a desperate cry. Anthony knelt down to her level, holding her shoulders firmly but gently. "Lucy, look at me. The doctors are going to take care. Doctors are of her. They're the best, but you need to let them work. You can stay here with me, okay? I promise we won't leave Anna alone." Lucy looked at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, but she nodded. She had no choice but to trust this strange man who, in just a few hours, had completely changed their reality. They entered the hospital together, Anthony with his hand on Lucy's shoulder, guiding her through the gleaming corridors. The smell of disinfectant, mixed with the cold air conditioning, was so different from the damp, warm shack where they lived that Lucy felt as if she had entered another planet. The walls were white and clean, the floors shone, and there were fresh flowers in vases scattered through the hallways. Doctors and nurses hurried past, but they all seemed to know exactly what they were doing. A receptionist approached Anthony with a clipboard, ready to gather information. He quickly provided his details, ensuring that all expenses would be charged to his account. The receptionist glanced at Lucy, with her dirty clothes and face marked by a hard life, but made no comment. If she found it strange that a man like Anthony Woodward was there with a street child, she kept her opinions to herself. They were directed to a private waiting room, away from the common area. It was a comfortable space, with soft sofas, a large screen TV playing quietly, and even a table with coffee, tea, and cookies. Lucy looked around with wide eyes, as if she couldn't believe such places really existed. "Are you hungry?" Anthony asked gently. Lucy nodded shyly. Anthony poured her a glass of orange juice and put some cookies on a small plate. The girl took them with trembling hands and began to eat slowly, but soon hunger took over, and she devoured the cookies in seconds. Anthony served her more and then a little more, watching with a heavy heart as she ate with the voracity of someone who didn't know when their next meal would be. While Lucy ate, Anthony sat on one of the sofas and took out his phone. His mind was racing, processing everything that had happened in the last few hours. He, who had spent the last 30 years building a business empire, who made decisions that moved millions of dollars every day, who negotiated with powerful politicians and businessmen, suddenly found himself responsible for 2 children he didn't even know. And the most surprising part was that he didn't regret it. In fact, for the first time in a long time, he felt he was doing something truly important. But practical reality soon began to knock. What would he do after Anna recovered? Where would the girls go? He couldn't just take them back to that horrible shack. But he also didn't know if he had the right to make decisions about their lives. These were complicated issues involving social services, authorities, bureaucracy. Anthony was used to solving complex problems, but this was different. This involved human lives, vulnerable children, and he wasn't sure how to proceed. His thoughts were interrupted when the waiting room door opened. It was the doctor who had attended to Anna. Anthony stood up immediately, and Lucy dropped the cookie she was eating, her eyes fixed on the doctor. "How is she?" Anthony's voice came out more anxious than he intended. The doctor sighed and sat in one of the chairs, motioning for Anthony to do the same. She looked at Lucy and then back at Anthony, choosing her words carefully. "Her situation is delicate. She has a severe respiratory infection, likely pneumonia. The high fever for so many days has greatly weakened her system. Additionally, she shows clear signs of severe malnutrition and anemia. Her body is fighting on multiple fronts at once." Lucy gripped Anthony's hand tightly, her small fingers squeezing his. He could feel her trembling. "Is she going to be okay?" The question came out in a frightened whisper. The doctor looked at the girl with compassion. "We're going to do everything we can. She's receiving strong antibiotics and an IV for hydration. We need to bring the fever down and fight the infection. The next few hours are critical, but she's in good hands." Anthony nodded, feeling a huge weight on his chest. He looked at the doctor, and asked in a low voice, "Can she have visitors?" "Not yet. She needs to rest and let the medication work, but as soon as possible I'll let you know." The doctor paused and then asked, her voice soft, "Are you family?" The question caught Anthony off guard. He looked at Lucy, who was watching him with those brown eyes full of hope and fear, and he felt something stir inside. Him. Family. He didn't have one. Not for decades. But there, in that moment, with this child holding his hand as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing world, he felt something he couldn't name. Yes. The word came out before he could think it through. "Yes, we are." The doctor nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer, and stood up. "I'll keep you informed of any changes. Try to get some rest. It's going to be a long night." She left, and Anthony sat there, still processing what he had said. Lucy tugged at his shirt sleeve, her eyes shining. "You said we're family." Anthony looked at her and felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know what to say, because he himself didn't understand why he had said it. But looking at this little girl, seeing the way she looked at him with a trust he didn't deserve but desperately wanted to honor, he realized that maybe in some strange and unexpected way, it was true. "Yes, I did. And we're going to take care of you both. I promise." Lucy threw herself into his arms in a tight hug, and Anthony held her, feeling her tears wet his expensive shirt. He stroked the girl's disheveled hair, and for the first time in decades, he allowed his own tears to fall. The hours dragged on in that waiting room. Anthony called Paul and sent him to find clean clothes for Lucy at a store that was still open, along with some personal hygiene items. While they waited, he helped Lucy take a shower in one of the hospital's private bathrooms. The girl was shy at first, but Anthony called a kind nurse named Beatrice to help, and together they managed to get her clean and presentable. When Lucy came out of the shower in new clothes and with her hair washed and combed, she looked like a completely different child. Her brown eyes shone, her cheeks had gained a little color from the food and the warmth of the hospital, and for the first time since Anthony had met her, she smiled. It was a shy, slightly embarrassed smile, but it was genuine. "You look beautiful," he said, and it was true. Lucy looked down, clearly not used to receiving compliments, but the smile didn't leave her face. It was almost 3 a.m. when the doctor returned. Anthony had dozed off on the sofa, with Lucy curled up beside him, also asleep. The soft knock on the door woke him, and he stood up quickly, careful not to wake the girl. The doctor smiled, and it was enough for Anthony to feel immense relief. "The fever has broken. She's breathing better. It's still too early to say she's out of danger, but she responded well to the medication. It's a very good sign." Anthony let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Can I see her?" "You can, but only for—" "But a few minutes. She needs to rest." He gently woke Lucy, and the two of them followed the doctor through the silent hospital corridors. It was Christmas now. Technically, it was past midnight. Merry Christmas, Anthony thought ironically. But maybe, in a strange way, it really was a special Christmas, the most special he'd had in a very long time. Anna was in a private room, lying in a hospital bed with clean white sheets. There was a monitor beside her, marking her heartbeat in a steady, reassuring rhythm. Her breathing was still shallow, but much better than before. When Lucy entered the room, her eyes filled with tears. "Anna!" She ran to the bed and held her sister's hand. Anna opened her eyes slowly, and when she saw Lucy, a faint smile appeared on her pale lips. "Lucy, you look pretty." Her voice was just a whisper, but it was her voice, and that's what mattered. Lucy laughed and cried at the same time, holding her sister's hand as if she would never let go. Anthony stood at the door, watching the scene. There was something deeply moving about that moment, in the way the two sisters looked at each other, as if they were the only thing that mattered in the world. And maybe they were. For them, one was all the other had. Anna turned her head and saw Anthony. Her brown eyes, so much like Lucy's, studied him with curiosity. "Who are you?" Before Anthony could answer, Lucy spoke up, her voice full of enthusiasm. "He's Anthony. He helped us, Anna. He brought food and brought us here. He said we're family." Anna looked at Anthony for a long moment, and then, surprisingly, she also smiled. It was a tired smile, but there was gratitude in it. "Thank you." The word was simple, but it carried enormous weight. Anthony nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He approached the bed and gently touched Anna's arm. "You're going to get well, I promise." The doctor appeared at the door, indicating it was time to let Anna rest. Lucy was reluctant to let go of her sister's hand, but finally gave in when Anna whispered that it was okay, that she was going to sleep for a bit. Back in the waiting room, Anthony realized he needed to make practical decisions. He called Marcella, his lawyer, and one of the few people he truly trusted. She answered sleepily, clearly annoyed at being woken up in the middle of the night on Christmas Day. But when Anthony quickly explained the situation, she was silent for a moment. "Anthony, you know this is going to be complicated, right? These children should probably be under the care of the state. There are legal issues involved. I know. But I'm not letting them go back to that place. I won't." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "I need you to help me do this the right way, legally. I want to get custody of them." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Marcella and Anthony had worked together for over 15 years, and she had never seen him so determined about something that wasn't business. "All right, I'll start researching what we need to do, but Anthony, are you sure? This will completely change your life." Anthony looked at Lucy, who had fallen asleep again on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket a nurse had brought. Her expression was peaceful for the first time, without the weight of worry she had carried since he met her. "I'm sure." He hung up and sat next to Lucy, watching her sleep. His mind was filled with thoughts, memories, and emotions he had kept locked away for so long he had almost forgotten they existed. He thought of his own childhood, of the nights he had slept hungry, cold, not knowing if he would survive until the next day. He thought of the woman who had helped him once, who had given him bread and a few kind words that had planted a seed of hope in his heart. That woman never knew the impact she had on his life. She probably didn't even remember him, but he remembered. And now, decades later, life was giving him the chance to be that person for someone else. The chance to be the outstretched hand, the generous heart, the voice that says, "You are not alone." He didn't know if he was ready. He didn't know if he would be a good father or guardian or whatever he was becoming for these girls, but he knew he had to try. Because if he didn't try, if he simply let them go back to that terrible life, he would never forgive himself. Outside the window, the city of New York was beginning to wake up to Christmas Day. The first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. In thousands of homes, families were waking up to open presents, prepare feasts, celebrate together. And there in that hospital, in a silent waiting room, a lonely man and two orphan girls were forming the unlikely beginning of something that might, with time and care, become a real family. But as that tender moment unfolded in the hospital, in another part of New York, some pieces began to move. Sonia, the bakery owner, hadn't been able to sleep that night. The scene she had witnessed, the way that rich man had confronted her, the way he had taken Lucy away, it had all left her deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't remorse, not exactly. It was more a feeling that something big had happened, something that could have consequences. She had known Lucy for months. The girl showed up almost every day, asking for work in exchange for food. Sonia had always thought she was doing a favor, giving the child a chance to earn something instead of just begging. But now, replaying the night in her mind, she began to question herself. Had she been cruel? Had she exploited a vulnerable child? And who was that man? What would he do with the girls? Sonia got out of bed and went to the window of her small apartment above the bakery. Down below, Mott Street was quiet, decorated with Christmas lights that still blinked in the early morning. She sighed, feeling a weight on her chest she couldn't identify. If you were in Anthony's place, would you have helped the girls or would you have just gone on your way? Tell us in the comments. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Anthony finally allowed sleep to take him. His last conscious thought before drifting off was the feeling of Lucy's gentle breathing beside him, and the certainty that, no matter what happened from that moment on, he was no longer alone, and neither were they. The first rays of Christmas morning sun streamed through the windows of Mount Sinai Hospital, bringing a golden light that seemed to carry the promise of new beginnings. Anthony woke up with a crick in his neck from sleeping on the sofa, but the physical discomfort was insignificant compared to the whirlwind of emotions that consumed him. Beside him, Lucy was still sleeping soundly, finally getting real rest for the first time in days, perhaps weeks. He stood up carefully so as not to wake her and went to the window. Below, New York City stretched out in all directions, a gigantic metropolis that never truly slept. Even on Christmas Day, there were cars on the streets, people walking, life happening. But for Anthony, everything seemed different that morning. It was as if he were seeing the city for the first time, with eyes that finally saw, beyond the numbers, contracts and deals that had defined his life for so long. The door opened softly, and a nurse entered, the same Beatrice who had helped with Lucy the night before. She smiled when she saw Anthony was awake. "Good morning, Mr. Woodward. I brought coffee and some breakfast items." She placed a tray on the coffee table. "And I have good news. Anna was stable through the night. The fever hasn't returned, and she's responding very well to the antibiotics." Anthony felt immense relief wash over him. "Can I see her?" "Of course. The attending physician has already authorized longer visits, but perhaps it's best to let the little one sleep a bit more." Beatrice looked at Lucy tenderly. She had a rough night before she finally managed to fall asleep. Anthony agreed. He drank the hot coffee Beatrice had brought, feeling the beverage warm his tired body. As he drank, his mind began to work on the practical implications of everything that had happened. Monday would be a business day, and he would need to set in motion a series of legal actions to ensure he could properly care for the girls. But before that, he needed to better understand their situation. Who were their parents? Why had they been abandoned? Was there any family that could be found? His reflections were interrupted when his phone vibrated. It was a message from Marcella, his lawyer. She had already started working, even on a holiday. The message was long, detailing the steps needed to initiate a custody process. It would involve child protective services, visits from social workers, background checks, psychological evaluations. It wouldn't be easy or quick, but it was possible. Marcella ended the message by saying she had already contacted some acquaintances who could help expedite the process. Anthony replied quickly, thanking her, and then got up to go see Anna. He covered Lucy with the blanket, making sure she was comfortable, and left the room quietly. Anna's room was at the end of the hall. When Anthony entered, he found the girl awake, sitting up in bed with a few pillows supporting her back. She was still pale, but there was more life in her eyes than the night before. A breakfast tray was on the table next to the bed, and Anna was slowly eating a piece of toast with jam. "Good morning." "Good," Anthony said softly, so as not to startle her. Anna looked at him and smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Good morning." Her voice was still weak, but it was clearer than before. Anthony pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Better." Anna took a sip of orange juice. "Much better than I felt before." There was so much weight in those simple words. Anthony could imagine the suffering she had endured during those days of fever, lying on that dirty mattress without medicine, without help, with only a little sister desperately trying to keep her alive. "Anna, I need to ask you some questions. It might be hard to talk about, but it's important. Is that okay?" Anna nodded, placing the toast back on the plate. Her thin fingers fidgeted nervously with the edge of the sheet. "Your mother. When was the last time you saw her?" The girl looked down, and Anthony could see tears beginning to form. "A long time ago. More than a year, I think. She said she was going to look for work in another city. She said that when she got settled, she would come back for us. But she never came back." "No." Anna wiped away a tear that escaped. "We waited a long time. Lucy still believes Mommy will come back, but I don't think she will." The words were spoken with a painful maturity for someone so young. Anthony felt his heart ache. "And your father? Do you know anything about him?" Anna shook her head. "Mommy never talked about him. She only said once that he left before we were born, that he didn't even know we existed. Do you remember your mother's full name? Marina Silva. The name was common, which would make the search more difficult. But Anthony made a mental note to pass the information to Marcella. Maybe there were records, documents, something that could help locate the woman, or at least understand what had happened to her. Anna, until your mother shows up, you and Lucy need someone to take care of you. And Anthony paused, choosing his words carefully. I would like to be that person. If you'll have me, of course. Anna looked at him with those large, serious eyes, processing what he had said. But we don't know you. I know, and you have every right to be scared or not to trust me, but I promise I will do everything to take good care of you. I'll give you a safe home, food and education, everything you need. And if, in the future, your mother comes back, nothing will stop you from being with her. I just want to make sure you're okay until then. Anna was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Anthony, as if trying to read his soul. Finally, she asked in a small voice, Why? Why do you want to do this for us? The question was simple, but the answer was complex. Anthony took a deep breath, deciding to be honest. Because when I was a child, I was like you. I was hungry. I had no one. And someone helped me once when I needed it most. That help changed my life. It gave me a chance. And now seeing you, it's like I'm getting a chance to pay it forward, to be for you what that person was for me. Anna absorbed the words in silence. Then, slowly, she extended her small hand toward Anthony. He took her hand carefully, feeling her fragile fingers close around his. Okay, you can take care of us. They were just simple words, spoken by a sick child in a hospital bed. But to Anthony, they meant everything. They meant trust. They meant hope. They meant a second chance for both him and them. He stayed with Anna for a few more minutes, talking about lighter things. She told him she liked to draw, that she dreamed of going to school like other children, that her favorite color was purple. They were small details, but each one helped Anthony get to know this brave little girl who had survived so much. When he returned to the waiting room, he found Lucy awake, sitting on the sofa with a glass of juice in her hand. She looked at him expectantly. How is she? Much better. She's awake and eating. Do you want to go see her? Lucy's face lit up and she jumped off the sofa, nearly spilling the juice. Anthony smiled and guided her back to Anna's room. When the two sisters saw each other, there was a moment of pure joy. Lucy ran to the bed and they hugged, laughing and crying at the same time. Anthony watched from the door, feeling a tenderness he didn't know he was capable of. But his moment of peace was interrupted when his phone rang. It was Marcella. Anthony, we have a problem. Her voice was tense. He stepped out of the room and answered in a low voice. What is it? Someone filed a report with Child Protective Services. They said you took 2 street children and brought them to a hospital without legal authorization. They want to speak with you immediately. Anthony clenched his teeth. Who filed the report? I'm not sure, but I have my suspicions. Probably someone at the hospital who found the situation strange, or, she paused, or that bakery owner. You said you had an argument with her yesterday. Sonia. Of course it was her. Probably afraid that Anthony would report her for child exploitation, she had decided to strike first, casting suspicion on him. What do I do? Marcella sighed. You cooperate. You have no choice. I'll be there in an hour. Don't speak to anyone from CPS until I arrive. And Anthony, stay calm. You did nothing wrong, but the situation is delicate. He hung up, feeling immense frustration. It was unbelievable. He had saved 2 children who were in real danger, had spent a fortune on medical care, was trying to do the right thing, and now he was being treated like a suspect in something sinister. But Anthony was not a man who backed down easily. He had built an empire by facing much greater adversities than government bureaucracy. If they wanted to question his intentions, let them come. He had the resources, the contacts, and most importantly, the truth on his side. He returned to the room and found the girls talking animatedly. They stopped when they saw him enter, sensing the tension on his face. "Did something happen?" Anna asked, her voice worried. Anthony forced a reassuring smile. "Nothing major, just some boring adult stuff I need to deal with. But don't worry, everything's going to be fine." He didn't want to scare them, but he knew he would soon have to explain that people were coming to ask questions, that there would be an investigation. It was part of the process, but he would do his best to protect them from any additional stress. Marcella arrived at the hospital in less than an hour, dressed casually but with her briefcase under her arm. She was a woman in her 40s, with black hair tied in a ponytail, thin framed glasses, and an expression that tolerated no nonsense. She met Anthony in the waiting room, and they spoke in low voices, while Beatrice, the nurse, stayed with the girls. "The people from CPS are on their way." Marcella opened her briefcase and began organizing documents. "I've already prepared a statement explaining yesterday's events. I also have Anna's medical records that prove she was in a situation of real danger and that your intervention was necessary." "And what about the report?" "We'll see what they have, but Anthony, you need to be prepared for the possibility that they might take the girls to a temporary shelter while they investigate." Anthony's expression hardened. "That's not going to happen." Marcella placed a hand on his arm, her voice firm but gentle. "I know you care about them, but you have to follow legal procedures. If you resist, you'll make the situation worse for everyone, especially for Anna and Lucy." Anthony knew she was right, but the thought of seeing those girls taken away, after everything they had been through, was unbearable. 2 hours later, 2 representatives from Child Protective Services arrived at the hospital, a woman in her 50s named Vera and a younger man named Robert. Both had serious but not hostile expressions. They introduced themselves politely and asked to speak with Anthony in private. The conversation was long and detailed. Anthony explained every step of what had happened the previous night, from the moment he saw Lucy to the decision to bring them to the hospital. Marcella supplemented with documents and evidence that supported his story. The representatives asked questions about his intentions, his background, his ability to care for the children. Vera, the older caseworker, was particularly meticulous. She wanted to know everything. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Mr. Woodward, I understand that your intentions seem to be good, but you need to understand our position. 2 vulnerable children appear without proper documentation, and a wealthy man they didn't know until yesterday takes them to a hospital. It is our duty to investigate. I understand perfectly, and I am willing to cooperate completely. But these girls have suffered enough. They need stability, not more trauma." Robert, the younger caseworker, looked at the documents on the table. "The older girl's medical condition was critical. If you hadn't intervened, Mr. Woodward, she might have—" He left the sentence hanging, but the meaning was clear. Vera sighed. "We will need to conduct a full assessment of the situation. We need to try to locate the children's mother, check for other relatives, and evaluate whether you are suitable to be their temporary guardian." "How long will that take?" "A few weeks, maybe a month. During that period, the children would normally be placed in a shelter." Anthony began to protest, but Marcella quickly interrupted. "Is there any possibility of emergency temporary custody, given that Anna is still receiving medical treatment and that separating the sisters would cause additional suffering?" Vera and Robert exchanged glances. It was clear they were divided. Finally, Vera spoke. "It's possible. But we would have to make regular visits, and Mr. Woodward would have to agree to psychological evaluations for both himself and the children. Furthermore, any sign that the girls are not being well cared for, and they will be removed immediately. I agree to all conditions." Anthony didn't hesitate, and there was another complication. Robert shuffled through his papers. "We received information that there was a situation of child labor involved, a bakery in Chinatown. We need to investigate that as well." "Sonia." Anthony felt a grim satisfaction. Her plan to pin the blame on him had backfired. He provided all the details he had about the situation at the bakery, and Marcella added that there were witnesses who could confirm the exploitation. After another hour of discussions and paperwork, the caseworkers finally agreed to the temporary guardianship with an extensive list of conditions. Anthony would sign whatever was necessary. He just wanted to make sure Anna and Lucy would stay with him. When Vera and Robert left, Anthony collapsed onto the waiting room sofa, exhausted. Marcella sat beside him, packing away the documents. "You did it," she said with a half smile. "For now, at least. It's just the beginning, isn't it?" She nodded. "It's going to be a long battle. But Anthony, are you prepared for this? To completely change your life?" He thought about the question. His life before was empty, lonely, filled only with work and more work. Now he had 2 children depending on him, needing him. It was frightening, overwhelming, and completely different from anything he had ever known. But for the first time in decades, he felt he had a real purpose. "I'm prepared." Marcella smiled, a genuine expression this time. "Then let's do this right. I'm going to need all the information we can get on Marina Silva. If she's alive and can be found, we'll find her. And we're going to uncover the full story of these girls." Anthony agreed, but something in the back of his mind bothered him. The name Marina Silva. There was something familiar about it, something he couldn't quite place. It was like a memory on the tip of his tongue. A connection his brain was trying to make but couldn't yet complete. He pushed the thought aside for now. He had more immediate things to worry about. Anna would need to stay in the hospital for a few more days. Lucy would need psychological and medical follow-up as well, and he would need to prepare his home, his life, to welcome 2 children. It was Christmas Day, and instead of his usual solitude, Anthony Woodward found himself in the middle of the greatest challenge of his life. But looking at the girls, seeing the shy smiles beginning to appear on their faces, he knew there was nowhere else in the world he would rather be. 3 weeks had passed since that Christmas Eve that had changed everything. Anthony's mansion on the Upper East Side, once a silent mausoleum of success and loneliness, now echoed with children's voices, shy laughter, and the sound of small feet running through marble hallways. Anna had been discharged from the hospital after 10 days of intensive treatment, and since then the 2 sisters had been adjusting to the new reality of their lives. The transformation had not been easy. Anna still needed regular medical checkups and medication to strengthen her immune system, weakened by years of malnutrition. Lucy had frequent nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night calling for her mother, and it took time for her to calm down again. Both were in therapy, working through the trauma of abandonment and the extreme poverty they had known. But there was progress. Anna had gained weight, her cheeks had regained their color, and her eyes shone with a liveliness that hadn't existed before. She spent hours drawing with the art supplies Anthony had bought, creating colorful fantasy worlds where there were always happy families and houses full of food. Lucy was more talkative, less frightened, and had developed a particular attachment to Anthony, following him around the house like a small protective shadow. Anthony, in turn, was discovering aspects of himself he never knew existed. He had learned to braid Lucy's hair, even if the braids came out crooked. He had learned to read children's stories with different voices for each character, making the girls laugh. He had learned that hugs could heal almost anything, and that simply being present meant more than any expensive gift. But the legal situation was still complicated. Marcella and her team were working tirelessly to track down Marina Silva. They had discovered that the woman was originally from a small town in Ohio and had come to New York almost 10 years ago in search of work. Records showed she had worked various temporary jobs, cleaner, cook, maid, but had never stayed long in one place. Marina's last formal employment record dated back 18 months at a family home in Greenwich Village. Marcella had managed to get the contact information for the former employers and had scheduled an interview for that afternoon. Anthony decided to go in person, taking the girls with him. Perhaps they could remember something, some detail that would help piece together the puzzle of their mother's story. The house in Greenwich Village was elegant, a 2-story building with a well-kept garden. They were greeted by Mrs. Cecilia, a woman with white hair and kind eyes who must have been in her 70s. She invited them all inside, offering coffee and cookies as they sat in the living room. Marina Silva. Mrs. Cecilia repeated the name thoughtfully. Yes, she worked here for almost 2 years. She was a Good woman, a hard worker, but always very sad. You could see she carried a great weight on her heart. Do you know what happened to her? Why she left? Anthony asked, keeping his tone careful. Anna and Lucy were sitting beside him, hanging on every word. Mrs. Cecilia sighed. She had health problems that were getting worse. She started having severe pain, missing work. I insisted she see a doctor, even offered to pay, but she was afraid. She said her papers weren't in order, that she couldn't seek official help because she was afraid of losing her daughters. The words hit Anthony like a punch. Marina was afraid of losing her daughters, probably because she was already sick, already knew she couldn't care for them properly. Had she left them not out of abandonment, but as a desperate attempt to protect them? Do you have any idea where she went? Mrs. Cecilia shook her head. She just didn't come back one day. I was worried. Tried to call, but the number I had no longer worked. She was always very private, never talked much about her personal life, but there was one time. The woman paused, as if retrieving a distant memory. There was one time she looked at an old photo I had on the wall and started to cry. It was a photo from the opening of the Queen's Center Mall back in the 80s. Anthony felt a chill run up his spine. Queen's Center Mall. His father had worked on the construction of that mall. He remembered because it had been one of his father's last jobs before disappearing from his life when Anthony was only 6. Could it be? Do you still have that photo? Mrs. Cecilia stood up and went to a bookshelf, taking down a dusty picture frame. She handed it to Anthony. The photo was old and slightly faded, showing a large group of construction workers posing in front of what would become the mall, still under construction. Dozens of smiling faces, men in hard hats and work clothes. Anthony studied the photo carefully, his heart racing. And then he saw it. In the left corner of the photo, a young man in his 20s, with a wide smile and eyes that Anthony would recognize anywhere. It was his father, Charles Woodward, and next to him, partially obscured by another worker, was a young woman. She wasn't wearing construction clothes. She was clearly just there visiting someone. A woman with long brown hair and eyes that, even through the poor quality of the old photo, looked familiar. Anthony felt the world spin around him. That woman. She was too young to be Marina, but the resemblance was striking. He turned the photo over and saw something handwritten on the back, almost faded by time. Charles W. and Caroline, June 1984. Caroline. Not Marina, but the last name. Silver. Was it possible that... Mr. Woodward? Mrs. Cecilia's voice brought him back to the present. Are you all right? You've gone pale. Anthony cleared his throat, trying to organize his thoughts. Mrs. Cecilia, when Marina looked at this photo, did she say anything? Yes. The woman closed her eyes, trying to remember. She said something like, my mother used to talk about this place. She said my mother met my father here, but I never knew him. The puzzle began to assemble in Anthony's mind with terrifying clarity. Caroline, the woman in the photo, must have gotten involved with his father, Charles, during the mall's construction. They had a relationship and she became pregnant. But Charles already had another relationship at the time with Anthony's mother. When he found out about Caroline's pregnancy, he panicked and disappeared, abandoning both families. Caroline had a daughter, Marina, and Marina, years later, had Anna and Lucy, which meant... Anthony looked at the girls beside him, and the truth hit him with devastating force. Anna and Lucy weren't just 2 children he had saved in a moment of compassion. They were his grandnieces, blood relatives. The connection he had felt from the very first moment wasn't just empathy. It was a bond that ran deeper than he could have ever imagined. He needed a moment to process the information. Mrs. Cecilia watched him with concern, and the girls looked at him, confused by his reaction. Finally, Anthony stood up, his voice hoarse. Mrs. Cecilia, do you have any idea of hospitals or clinics where Marina might have gone? Any place she mentioned? The woman thought for a moment. She once spoke about Bellevue Hospital, said it was the only place that treated people without asking too many questions. But that was a long time ago. Anthony thanked her and left quickly, taking the girls back to the car. His mind was In a turmoil, he immediately called Marcella, explaining everything he had discovered. "Anthony, this changes everything." Marcella's voice was filled with urgency. "If you can prove this family connection, the custody case becomes much stronger. But first we need to find Marina, or at least confirm what happened to her. We're going to Bellevue Hospital, now." Bellevue Hospital was immense, a complex of buildings that served thousands of people every day. But Marcella had contacts, and with the help of a social worker who owed her a few favors, they gained access to the records. It took hours of searching, sifting through files and computer systems, but they finally found it. Marina Silva had been admitted to the hospital 16 months ago with an advanced stage of a serious health condition. She had been hospitalized for 3 weeks and then transferred to a specialized treatment center. The center was in the East Village, a modest but well-kept facility. When they arrived, a head nurse named Roseanne met them. Her face softened when she heard Marina's name. "Marina is here. She's in palliative care. Her condition is terminal, but she's stable at the moment. She speaks very little, but she is conscious." Anthony felt his legs weaken. Anna and Lucy, who had been quiet throughout the search, suddenly understood what was happening. "Our mother is here." Anna's voice came out in a trembling whisper. Roseanne looked at the girls, her eyes filling with tears. "You're her daughters. She talks about you every day. She was trying to protect you. She didn't want you to see her like this." "Can I see my mommy?" Lucy started to cry. "Please, I want to see my mommy." Roseanne looked at Anthony, who nodded. She led them down a hallway to a small room bright with the sunlight streaming through the window. And there, lying in a hospital bed, was a woman who looked much older than her 30-something years. Marina Silva had graying brown hair, her face marked by suffering. But when her eyes saw Anna and Lucy standing in the doorway, something in them lit up. Something that had been dead for so long came back to life. "My girls." Her voice was weak, but filled with emotion. "My girls." Anna and Lucy ran to the bed, hugging their mother and crying. Marina held them with what little strength she had, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to protect you. I didn't want you to see Mommy like this." Anthony stood at the door, witnessing the reunion with a heavy heart. After a few minutes, Marina looked at him over her daughters' heads. "Who are you? How did you find my girls?" Anthony approached slowly. "My name is Anthony Woodward. I found your daughters a few weeks ago. Anna was very sick. I took them to the hospital, and I've been taking care of them ever since." Marina studied him intently, and then her eyes widened. "Woodward? Are you Charles Woodward's son?" Anthony nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I am." Marina closed her eyes, silent tears streaming down. "My mother used to talk about him. Caroline. My mother was Caroline Silver. She loved your father, but he left her when he found out she was pregnant with me. She spent her whole life waiting for him to come back, but he never did. She died alone, telling me stories about her love." Anthony felt his own tears begin to fall. "My father abandoned us too. I was 6 years old. He never came back. I spent my entire childhood not understanding why." Marina opened her eyes and looked at him. "Our stories are so similar, both abandoned by the same man, both suffering for the choices he made." "But it doesn't have to be that way for your daughters," Anthony said, his voice firm despite the tears. "Marina, I know you're sick. I know you don't have much time, but I promise you, I will take care of Anna and Lucy. They are my family. I will not abandon them like our fathers abandoned us." Marina looked at him for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to read his soul. Then slowly she nodded. "I can see that in you. You have a good heart. You are different from your father." She squeezed her daughter's hands. "Girls, listen to Mommy. I won't be able to stay with you for much longer. But Anthony, he will take care of you. He is family, real family, and I want you to stay with him. Can you do that for Mommy?" Anna and Lucy were crying, clinging to their mother, but they both nodded. Marina looked at Anthony again. "Thank you for finding them, for saving them, for being the man your father never was." The words broke something inside Anthony. He approached the bed and held Marina's hand, and the five of them stood there together, a family shattered by abandonment and pain, but brought back together by compassion and love. In the following days, Anthony arranged everything legally. With Marcella working tirelessly, they managed to expedite the custody process, especially now with confirmation of family ties and Marina's direct authorization. Anna and Lucy visited their mother every day, spending hours by her side, drawing pictures, telling stories, simply being present. Marina remained conscious and relatively comfortable for another 2 weeks. She used that precious time to say a proper goodbye to her daughters, to tell them stories of when they were babies, to apologize for all the times she couldn't protect them as she wanted. She also spoke at length with Anthony, sharing memories of her own mother, Caroline, and the stories she had told about Charles. It was during one of these conversations that Marina handed Anthony a yellowed envelope. Inside was the letter Caroline had written to Charles, a letter that was never sent because she didn't know where he had gone. It was a letter of love, of hurt, of forgiveness. And at the end, Caroline wrote, "I hope that, wherever you are, you find peace. And I hope our daughter never knows the pain of abandonment, as I have." Anthony read the letter and felt decades of anger and resentment begin to dissolve. His father had been a weak man, unable to face the consequences of his choices. But that legacy of abandonment ended there, with Anthony, with Anna and Lucy. He would break the cycle. Marina passed away peacefully one spring morning, surrounded by her daughters and Anthony. Her last words were of gratitude and love. Anna and Lucy cried, but there was a peace about them too. They had been given the chance to say goodbye, to say, "I love you," one last time, to know that their mother had never abandoned them for lack of love, but out of a desperate desire to protect them. The funeral was simple but dignified. Anthony ensured Marina was buried next to her mother, Caroline, reuniting the two women who had suffered so much because of the same man. Anna and Lucy placed flowers on the grave, and Anthony placed Caroline's letter with them. In the months that followed, life began to find a new rhythm. Anna and Lucy were officially placed under Anthony's permanent guardianship. They started attending a nearby private school, making friends, laughing more each day. The therapy continued, and there would always be scars from what they had been through, but now there was also hope, security, love. Anthony transformed one of the rooms in his mansion into an art studio for Anna, where she spent hours creating colorful worlds. Lucy's room was decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars because she was still sometimes afraid of the dark, and the stars made her feel safe. Anthony's company continued to run, but he now worked fewer hours, prioritizing time with the girls. He went to school meetings, helped with homework, made dinner on the cook's nights off. He became a father, not by biology but by choice, and he discovered it was the best choice he had ever made in his entire life. One evening, almost a year after that fateful Christmas Eve, Anthony was reading the girls a story before bed. It was a tale about a family that finds each other after being lost. When he finished, Anna looked at him with those serious eyes that made her seem much older than she was. "Uncle Anthony, do you think Mommy is happy now?" Anthony considered the question carefully. He never lied to the girls, even when the truth was difficult. "I think so. She knew you would be safe and loved, and I think that's all she ever wanted." Lucy, who was nearly asleep, murmured drowsily, "We love you, Uncle Anthony." The simple words hit Anthony like never before. He kissed each of their foreheads, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I love you too, more than words can say." He turned off the light and closed the door softly, leaving it ajar as Lucy preferred. Walking down the hall toward his room, Anthony stopped in front of a photo he had put on the wall. It was a new photo, taken a few weeks ago at the park. In it, he was in the center, with Anna on one side and Lucy on the other, all of them smiling. It was a simple photo, but it meant everything. Next to it, he had placed the old photo from the Queen Center Mall, the same one Mrs. Cecilia had given him. It was a reminder of where it all began, of the wrong choices his father had made, and of the decision Anthony had made not to repeat those mistakes. That Christmas Eve, when he had seen a little girl struggling to carry an impossible weight, he had thought he was saving 2 children. But the truth was deeper. He had saved a family, his family. And in doing so, he had saved himself. Outside, the city of New York continued its frantic pace, but inside that mansion, in rooms filled with colorful drawings and glow-in-the-dark stars, 3 people who had been lost had finally found their way home. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Anthony, Anna, and Lucy has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of redemption, love, and family, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you most in this story. Was it Anthony's courage in opening his heart? Was it the girl's strength in the face of so much suffering? Or was it the revelation of the family ties that bound them all? Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us that even in the most difficult situations, love and compassion can transform lives. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with a new story that will stir your emotions.